"You can't go in there, sweetie," that's what the guard told her. And yeah, that happened right there under the pale morning sun warming the old bricks of Riverton Square, while a crowd pressed in shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on a blackboard dragged outside like a carnival prize, chalk dust floating in the light like snow that forgot how to fall, you know what I mean. Let me back up a sec. The university had promised something big. A public symposium, Hollowell University taking math out of the lecture hall and into the square because apparently numbers behave better when pigeons are judging. And the headline act, the dare that pulled retirees and grad students and curious teenagers into the chill air, was a single line on the board, written in a hand so neat it felt surgical. Goldbach's conjecture. Every even integer greater than 2 is the sum of 2. Primes, ancient, unsolved, mythic, the kind of problem that makes people whisper even though there's no reason to whisper. And 11 steps behind the front row, standing where the sun didn't quite reach beside a rusted lamppost that leaned like it had secrets, a little flower seller froze on the edge of it all. A kid no taller than the chalkboard. Cheeks pink, shoes too thin for March. Hair tucked behind both ears, as if that was the only way to make the world behave. A paper bundle of daisies tucked in her elbow like a promise. Her name wasn't on any program, because of course it wasn't, but I'll tell you her name now, because names matter, because credit matters, because the first mistake grown-ups make around brilliance is letting it stay anonymous. Maya Brooks, age 11, neighborhood kid, lived with her grandma above a closed bakery where the heater coughed like an old dog and stopped when you needed it most, sold flowers mornings. Finished homework on napkins nights, learned to be quiet but not to stop seeing. The guard Ruth kind eyes, big jacket, voice pitched low so it didn't embarrass anyone, leaned toward Maya and said, soft but firm, "You can't go in there, sweetie, invited guests only." And Maya nodded, no fuss, no scene, just a careful retreat to the curb, where she set the daisies down and lifted her chin so she could still see the board, not the symbols exactly, not the words, but the spaces in between. The way the numbers seemed to lean toward each other, like magnets, like petals, like threads, waiting to be pulled. I was there. By the way, I'm Evan Rios, first-year grad at Hollowell, the very specific combination of exhausted and stubborn that comes from living on coffee and conjectures. And when I glanced over and caught the kid drawing on floor's paper with a broken pencil, circles inside circles, dots in pairs, arcs like ribs, I almost told myself a story I'd told too many times. Cute, a doodler. Nothing to see here except I looked longer, and the shapes didn't feel random. They felt like rhythm, like breathing. Later that day, when the square thinned and the chalk squeaks gave way to pigeons and traffic, I walked over and said, joking, the way you joke when you're scared you'll sound ridiculous, "Hey, want to take a crack at Goldbach?" And Maya didn't even smile. She just nodded at the board and murmured, barely louder than the wind, 38 is 31 and 7. 40 is 17 and 23, if you count around in a circle, and let me tell you. My brain stopped, it just stopped. "How do you mean count?" I asked, and she knelt, using a chalk shard somebody had dropped, drew a circle like a clock, marked the even numbers on the edge, then tapped pairs of primes that reached across the middle like roots finding water, petals. She whispered, not the right word for math, but also the only right word for what I was seeing, you know? I took a photo because I didn't trust myself to remember the exact curve of it, and that night, in my dorm where old coffee cups go to die, I traced her arcs into a quick script, checked her pairs, checked again, no proof, not even close, but a symmetry, a repeating structure, prime gaps showing up not like static, but like beats, short, long, short petals tightening then letting go, a garden where I'd expected noise. My advisor wrote back in 6 minutes, no formal basis. Children draw flowers. Evan and I wanted to be a good soldier, I did, but the image sat behind my ribs like a lodged breath, so the next night, I did what good soldiers and bad soldiers both do when they can't shake a thing. I opened a door that wasn't for me, snuck Maya in a lecture hall B32 after hours, slid a piece of chalk into her small hand, and watched a blackboard become a sky. She drew slow, precise, not cautious but faithful spirals curling outward, even numbers on the ring, prime pairs stitching the center. 38 is equal to 31 plus 7. 40 is equal to 17 plus 23. 52 is equal to 29 plus 23 on, and at 2 a.m., when chalk dust had settled in her hair like frost, the light snapped on, and the head of our department DR, Marcus Whitaker, a man who loved rigor like oxygen, filled the doorway, with a single word that felt like a verdict: stop. He didn't ask, he didn't look, he erased one long arc, another, all those careful petals disappearing into a white blur, and Maya apologized to the floor, tiny voice, tiny body, hands chalked to the wrists like she'd been digging through winter looking for spring. And I said, she's not hurting anything. I said, she's seeing something. But Whitaker shook his head, this is not mathematics, and walked out, leaving a cloud of dust where a field had just been. Here's the twist, I didn't know until the next morning, and honestly, it saved us. Ruth, the guard who'd kept Maya back at the rope line, she wasn't just a guard. She used to teach high school math until her school closed and the district cut staff, which, yeah, that's America for you. She saw us slip in. She didn't stop us, and after Whitaker stormed off, she pointed at the camera domes in the corners and said, barely above a whisper, they record everything at night now. Check with IT. Ask for B32. Midnight to 3. Ruth had been keeping an eye on the room. Ever since a projector went missing last fall, gatekeeping isn't always about keeping people out. Sometimes it's about keeping a door from slamming shut. I got the footage, don't ask how many emails and one very polite tantrum it took, and when I watched it in my cramped room, the spirals unfolded in real time, line by line, a choreography of attention, and it wasn't proof of anything except that attention can be beautiful, which sometimes is enough to deserve a second look. So I clipped the best sequences, grabbed stills of each phase, and sent the whole bundle to a Prime Theory legend in Paris, DR. Alain Duval, with a note that said nothing smart, just, please look. Then Maya vanished. The bakery apartment went dark. The landlord shrugged through a speech about unpaid rent. The square felt bigger because she wasn't in it. And all I had was a napkin spiral, a daisy stem, and the kind of panic that sits on your chest and refuses to move. So I did what desperate people do in the age of too much internet. I uploaded a short clip to a public forum, visual modeling of prime pair symmetry. Contributor unknown. Age 11, and waited for the world to tell me I'd embarrass myself. By lunch, 100 comments. By dinner, 1,000. By midnight, the kind of mixture only the internet can brew. Mathematicians calling a hoax. Others saying it was clever, some suggesting it matched known, but unproven density patterns, as if that sentence wasn't a contradiction. Artists chiming in with phrases like the geometry of longing, retirees muttering about kids these days. You know, and then a quiet confirmation from the International Institute of Mathematics. We've received private materials from Mr. Rios. Further review underway. They called her the flower girl of Goldbach because the camera angle only showed her small back, her faded coat, her hands drawing loops, and while opinion pieces bloomed, I walked the city asking questions: shelters, libraries, soup kitchens, the back pews of churches, the bench outside the late-night laundromat where the old men argue about baseball like it matters nothing, just wind. 2 days later, the pretzel guy, you know the one, hands like oven mitts, always humming Sinatra, flagged me down, handed me an envelope, and said, she told me to give this to somebody with sad eyes, kids brutal like that. And inside, one more spiral, more intricate than any before, and a note: thank you for listening, I'll come back when the flowers bloom again. And if you think a grown man didn't cry standing between a lamppost and a pigeon, you need to get out more. The university tried to bury their mistake, as institutions do, but the clip of Whitaker erasing the board slipped into the discourse like a drop of ink. And once you see a big man sweep away a small girl's work, it's hard to unsee it. Petitions, op-eds, calls for accountability, a debate not just about math, but about who gets to be in the room, who gets to hold the chalk, who gets to define the shape of brilliance. We published a modest paper: symmetry of prime distribution and spiral modular systems. Careful, restrained, no promises, just observations, 3 annotated frames from the footage, notes on how the prime gaps behave like distances you could almost feel, and we left authorship as contributor unknown, because consent is a kind of proof too. And then a brown envelope arrived with 6 new diagrams, more advanced, spirals with secondary petals, faint Fibonacci echoes bending the ring, a whisper of cluster zones, no signature, just 4 words in a child's hand: petals always find center. That's when the team formed, not a big fancy grant, just 5 of us after hours. Me, 2 grad friends who didn't mind being called sentimental, a visiting prof who had quietly saved our department's coffee budget for years, and DR. Syra Malik, a retired number theorist whose voice was a violin and whose eyes held the impatience of people who've already earned the right to be impatient. And we mapped, digitized, measured angles like you measure weather, accepted that we weren't proving anything in the strict sense, but also that not everything worth keeping has to be a hammer. 3 weeks of evenings later, we had a terrain, not a solution, a map of prime behavior that felt like a coastline. Gentle at first, then serrated, hotspots where primes like to crowd, deserts where they hesitated, a kind of probabilistic garden. And when Dr. Malik leaned back and said, almost to herself, she isn't just seeing primes, she's hearing them. Nobody laughed because hearing is just measuring with your heart open. Pressure-mounted foundations asking for attribution. Journalists sniffing around, philanthropists offering scholarships to a kid we couldn't find, Whitaker getting quieter in faculty meetings, the guard, Ruth, passing me thermoses of tea on cold nights, and saying things like, don't let them scare you into forgetting what you saw, a sentence that works for almost everything. Honestly, and then spring arrived like it always does, rude and new. And Maya came back. Same corner, same lamppost, same way of holding still in a moving world. And this time when I crossed the street, I didn't say anything clever. I just sat beside her on the curb like the curb was holy ground. And she said, I wanted to know if the numbers would still make sense when no one was watching, and I nodded because that's the only test that ever mattered. She pulled out a new page, circles again, but washed with color, blue for even, gold for primes, green for pairs, a soft center marked with a single petal, and said, it's not math anymore, it's just a feeling. And I said, maybe it was always both, and we sat there while a city pretended not to stare. Whitaker went on TV because of course he did the set bill to make contrition look tasteful. Dark wood, muted blues, an interviewer with eyebrows that had seen things, and he held up a laminated print of Maya's spiral with shaking fingers and said, I didn't see her, I saw what I was trained to see, and then, quieter, I was wrong, and somewhere in a shelter across town a girl watched a man learn to be smaller, which is what an apology is when you strip it of theater. Hollowell updated the paper author. Maya Brooks, age 11, affiliation. Independent and Riverton's Community Center opened room 12B. Sunlight catching the dust like fireflies, floor marked with circles, bowls of chalk on every table, a painted sign, no tests, no desks, no right answers, just shapes, and Maya stood at the center not as a mascot for a cause, but as a teacher of noticing, which is the thing we ruin first in children, and then spend a fortune trying to buy back. Kids came loud, quiet, neurospicy, grieving, brilliant in ways report cards can't see, and Maya didn't say, solve this. She said, what does a number feel like? And a boy answered, a tickle you almost remember, and a girl said, warm like toast. And they drew that, they drew the feeling. And when a man from the district arrived with a clipboard heavy with expectations, he asked, is this math? And I told him the truth, it's pre-math. Like pre-language. We're not solving, we're noticing. He blinked, then sat on the floor and took a piece of chalk like it was communion. Ruth stopped by in uniform, knelt by a circle, drew a line, so clean it made the kids clap, twist number 2. By the way, because Ruth the guard, she didn't just keep us safe, she started Saturday mornings at the square, opening the ropes on purpose, telling kids, come closer, use the chalk, your eyes are invited here, gatekeeping turned inside out. Whitaker came to room 12B one afternoon, not as a savior, not even as a defendant, just as a man carrying a small box, pieces of slate from the board he'd erased, now painted with prime pairs in color, tiny notes written beneath in his cramped hand, mod patterns, gap distances, the math he loved. Soften, may I leave these here, he asked, and Maya nodded. We're a place where numbers don't have to prove anything to belong. And Whitaker wrote later, the deepest math begins before the first number is named, which from him felt like a bridge laid down stone by stone. The mail piled up spirals from Iceland, letters from community colleges in Iowa, a magazine cover asking the girl who made numbers bloom, a formal invitation from Paris, come speak, bring what you see. And when Maya stood in a sunlit room overseas, she didn't declare a victory. She drew circles, let the chalk do the talking. An elderly professor stood with trembling hands afterward and whispered, I forgot how much I used to feel it, and that, my friends, is a proof of something worth more than tenure. Back home, the city gave back a slice of Riverton Square benches, cedar ring, Chalkboards you could reach without a ladder. We called it the listening ring because that's what it asked of you. And on a soft evening, a cellist set up near the lamppost where it had begun, drew a bow across a string while kids traced arcs between primes that made even numbers feel like houses with the lights on, and Whitaker, hands in pockets, watched from the edge until Maya lifted a green stick toward him like a kind of absolution. He drew 59 and 41, an arc so true the children applauded without knowing why. People argued, because of course they did. Is it art? Is it math? Is it pedagogy? Is it a stunt? And while adults argued, wonder quietly became a habit, chalk circles appearing outside barbershops and bus stops, teenagers comparing spirals like sneakers, a retired engineer reporting that after 3 afternoons with chalk he finally understood why he loved bridges. Not because they don't fall, but because of how they hold. A year to the day after the erasing, Hollowell hosted an event we refused to call a lecture, chairs in a half circle around a wide canvas on the stage, buckets of chalk in the corners, no podium, no equations on screens, just a room that wanted something it couldn't name, and Maya walked out in a sweater too big for her elbows and didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. She drew one circle, then another, mark 42, pair 19 and 23, 5 and 37, and then said, "We don't solve a number, we listen to it." And a little girl in the back asked, "Can I draw one?" And Maya said, "Yes, bring your chalk," and the whole room shifted from audience to choir. When it ended, if you can call something like that, and ending, the provost murmured into a microphone about reverence and attention and how knowledge's foundation is wonder, not certainty, and the applause rose like weather, slow, warm, inevitable. In the hallway, Maya rubbed chalk from her palms, and I asked, "What's next?" And she said, "Go home, draw more, let the numbers tell me when they're ready," which is as close to a life plan as anyone needs. We still meet at room 12B, no tests, no desks, no right answers, just shapes. And once late in the season, when the sky held that thin winter light that makes everything honest, Maya stood in the listening ring and said, "Today we draw the last spiral." The kids gasped. Then she laughed. "Not the last forever, the last for now, the spiral that lets the others begin." And they drew inward and outward, lines crossing like threads. Not perfect, never perfect, but alive, which is better. As the sun slipped behind the library, the chalk lines glowed. The cello hummed something that might have been Bach or might have been an apology, set to music. Parents lingered with paper cups of cider. Ruth leaned against the lamppost, smiling like a secret. Whitaker held a stick of chalk, but didn't use it, just turned it in his fingers as if memorizing its weight. And Maya placed her piece on the stone and whispered, "You don't have to prove anything to belong here." And the square, I swear, breathed. That's the picture I want to leave you with. Dusk at the listening ring, chalk dust drifting like pollen, even numbers circling home while primes reach across the distance to meet them. A town that learned how to listen again. A girl who never asked for the room, but filled it anyway, not with answers, but with permission. If this story moved you, if it poked at the part of you that's still 11, still curious, still waiting at the rope line, tell me in the comments what you think justice looks like in a classroom. Who should get to hold the chalk? What counts as real work, and who gets to say so? And if you think a proof has to wear a tie to be true, or if sometimes maybe it can bloom like a flower on a cold morning and still change the world, you know what I mean.